Today I'm going to show you how to modify and install this switch pod that was manufactured for a Jeep JK in a 2005 Jeep TJ. Switch pods, these things are awesome. Been wanting one. Came across this just going on YouTube looking to learn how to wire up a switch, and then when I saw how many times after adding a couple switches I was going to go through the firewall, I stumbled on a video for the Apollo Intex switch with the voltmeter. Now that's not what this is. I wanted one. They don't make it anymore. At least they don't make it with the voltmeter. They do make without, and it has a dimming capability and a low voltage shutoff and probably a couple other neat doodads, but I like lights and switches, so I found one on Amazon, got it, and turned out not to be the brand name. I was pretty disappointed, but the seller gave me a generous refund for sending me basically a knockoff with possibly a broken switch on the end here. But that's not what this video is about. You can find plenty of them on this. What this is about is that I'm not putting this in a JK, which it's made for. I'm going to attempt to put it in a TJ. Second time that I found something I liked and it wasn't made for my Jeep, and did some modifications and was able to make it work. Now, this is supposed to mount on the windshield frame above the rearview mirror between the visors, and this on the ECU. On the JK, all you have to do is loosen a couple of bolts there on the ECU, slide these over, tighten them, and you're done. That's not going to work on the TJ. In fact, this isn't going to work on the windscreen either. It's wider than what will fit between the two visors, and this cut on the side doesn't come anywhere close to fitting the shape, nor does the mount that goes on the footman's loop line anywhere up with the loop that I have. Now, I could relocate the loop and modify the visor mounts, but it seems a little iffy and is going to leave a lot of gaps. So, got a couple ideas that I came up with, and unfortunately, the only one that works is, at least works well for me, is mounting it at the bottom of the console and upside down. So what does that mean? That means I've got an area where I can drill some holes and hopefully bolt it into a frame member in the dash, which will make it secure. I won't see any exposed wires, but the voltmeter will be upside down. But take a look at this. There's the voltmeter. You see there's a little plug right there and just 2 bolts. It looks to me that I can take that plug, undo those bolts, spin it 180 degrees, and put her back in place. I believe I can do the same with the switches. I'm not going to for now because this not being the brand name, these switches are pretty fragile. It already showed up with one that's may or may not be working. I'll know for sure once I power it up. In fact, I'm just going to rough wire everything to make sure that it does in fact work before I go through too much effort. So let's take a look at the Jeep and see where we can put the main relay module. This is my engine bay, and there's the battery over there. Now, there's just not a spot over there that's clean where I can mount this, and I certainly don't want to do it anywhere up in this corner near the radiator, the fan, or the belts. So I'm looking in this location. This is actually a similar location to where the unit is mounted in a JK. It's somewhat opposite the battery, and the wires are long enough that you can connect to the battery, and there's only one wire that crosses the firewall. Now in the JK, the firewall has an opening right about in this location. not so on the TJ, but there is one down in the footwell. This is a manual transmission. It's up by the clutch. If you pull your mats or carpet, get up under there, you'll see a round plastic disc, rubber disc, maybe 2 inches in diameter or so, and you can just pop that out and go through there. Now, I intend to cut a hole in that disc and run the wire through that so that it's still, for the most part, sealed. But back to the mount. So what I'm thinking of doing here is using this. That's a piece of heavy gauge steel angle. It's left over from installing my garage door openers. And it looks like there is some flat areas. There's already a couple of holes here in 2 different locations. So I may use one, add another. This isn't entirely flat. You can see there's a dip right here. So I may look and see what type of rigidity I get out of this probably 3-inch wide flat spot. If not enough there, I may just get a piece of composite material and scribe it down to fit so that I can make another hole over on this side. But that's basically the plan. Got a couple of stainless steel bolts that I'm going to use to attach the unit to this angle, and a couple more that I'm going to use to attach it to the fender. So I'm gonna mark my holes, drill a couple holes. After I drill them, I'm just gonna file them a little bit, hit them with some primer and some rust-proof coating, just in case. I mean, there's plenty of holes here that don't have any of that and seem to be faring okay, but not one to take any chances. So let me take care of those items and be right back. I got my 2 holes drilled. I started with this right here. There was already a hole in this location. I widened it out to fit this bolt. And these are stainless steel bolt, nut, and washer. And you can see I did here is tighten this down to the fender, and then I'm going to use this sort of as a leveling nut so that I can set this in position like so. Actually, it's like this, yeah. And that right there is a new hole that I drilled. So what I did is I just used a piece of blocking to roughly locate this angle parallel to the fender line right here. So now that I got my holes, I am going to touch up those drill holes, but I want to get this mounted and make sure everything lines up before I go through any extra effort. So I'm going to tighten these down and give a little test fit there. There's another note, because I could have faced this either way. I faced this in this particular direction so that when I pull that thumb screw out and take the cover off, all the wiring is facing me on the side of the Jeep here, so don't have to reach over, and that allows me to feed the wires through this slot, and I can follow the same path over to whatever accessories I've got, whether it's up front or along the side. Should be nice and clean. There we have it. I think it's pretty clean. There's a little bit of bounce here because of the standoff from the angle, and I've got another mounting hole right here that once I'm done wiring this, I'm gonna cut another piece of angle and line that up just like so, cut it short, and that'll stiffen that connection up. It's probably okay, but anytime metal's allowed to flex for any amount of time, it could stress and crack. But for now, I'm gonna leave it like that. I've got the wire draped over the engine, over toward the battery where I'm gonna make my connections. The next thing I'm going to do is run the cable into the cab to the switch module. And where that is going to come through, right up there. And I see that it's pretty dirty in here, but that's a project for another day. That black disc up there where you see that colored wire passing by is where you can get through the firewall. That pops out. You can pry it out from the inside or push it in from underneath the Jeep. I'm gonna pop that out. I'm gonna drill a hole just big enough to allow my cable to pass through. And then I'm gonna feed that cable up under the console to the center, which is where I decided to install the switch, right where I have my stereo remote. I'm gonna lose the usability of that little compartment there, but that's okay. I really only use it for that remote that I never touch. So let's get that popped out and drilled and fish our cable. I pulled that grommet from the firewall from inside the cab and just drilled a hole using a hole saw. Tried with a spade bit, and that just created a lot of heat. Hole saw did pretty good. I would have preferred a smaller hole because I could have got away with something smaller to pass that connector. Yeah, I also could have taken the connector off and reconnected, but rather just do it this way. Keep the factory connections as is, and I'll just patch up that hole a little bit. So I'm gonna feed these wires through the rest of the way, pop that grommet back in, and a couple things. I decided to just start zip tying this cable to where I wanted it, and wanted to pass under this hose, under the bar, behind that ground strap and the washer fluid. And in doing so, learned that there's not enough length in the negative cable to get to the battery. It's a similar distance on the JK, but I guess it's run differently, not sure. But I'm gonna have to make a run and get an extension for this, but not worried about it now. I'll run everything else and figure out what other issues there are, what other things I've missed, what other things I need from the store. So I'm just gonna keep plugging away and see what comes next. Next issue is this guy right here. This switch accessory requires a fused connection to a fuse that is switched on with the ignition. Now, right now, I'm using that already in the number 11 slot, and that's what's running my halos. So that when I turn the ignition on, the halo lights come on. I'm not aware of another free switch, or free fuse rather, in my Jeep. All the fuses in the engine compartment are on all the time. The only switched one that's free, or that I could use anyway, was number 11. So to solve that, I'm gonna simply cut this wire and to my halos, that is, and I'm just gonna run the halos to one of the accessory switches, and I'm gonna use this wire that's already run for the switch pod accessory. Might be another fuse, might be another way to do it, but I like the idea of being able to switch the halos on and off. And honestly, I'm not going to run 6 different accessories on here anyway. If that time comes, then I'll figure something out then. But for now, that's the plan. This red wire is the one that connects to the fuse that's turned on and off by the ignition. Now, I'm not getting into the wiring. There's plenty of other resources for that. I'm just kind of focusing on TJ specific idiosyncrasies between this and the JK. The only reason I mention it is in the JK, they reference, I believe it was an M6 fuse that's in the engine compartment, which is pretty convenient. That's not the case, at least not on my Jeep. So I already have, as I mentioned, that halo wire running in through that grommet. And I've soldered the two halos together and ran one wire to that switched fuse. So I'm gonna cut this here. That means that this single wire is going to my fuse box through that same grommet as I ran the switch wire. And then these two wires I will reroute to the accessory box and connect them to probably the first switch. So, and that's where that's where it helps to run the wires first, see where everything lays out. You know, zip ties are cheap, so kind of zip as I go, figure out how I'm gonna pull them apart. I've already broken apart the switch cable and threaded it behind this large piece of wire loom and down. You see there's some extra slack here. I'm gonna pull that through the engine compartment and zip that, tie that the rest of the way down. This guy runs all the way up toward the battery, which is, you know, convenient for how the JK is wired. I'm not going to undo all this. I've got enough wire. I'm going to leave a nice large radius bend there and zip tie this back so that I can connect to my black wire over here that goes into the fuse box. Now, I also label these as I go. It's all fresh in my mind as I'm doing it. Then 2 months later, when I want to check a connection, I can't tell which is which. In fact, kind of a sloppy job wiring my amber halo turn signals and the halos themselves, and sloppy meaning that I used wire that I had on hand. So I actually have yellow wire for the halos. It should have been for the turn signal, just because that's what I had. So now that I've figured out what's what, I'm going to go back and label those. But anyway, back to the project at hand here. I'm gonna run these wires, zip them in place. Rode out to the auto parts store and grabbed a battery cable. It's got the connection at both ends. Had to modify this one a little bit, just had to cut the tip off so that it could seat firmly on the existing negative cable. Got it bolted down pretty tight. Going to put some heat shrink and electrical tape on there just to cover that in case it comes in contact with anything. Then get back to wiring. Here's a switch pod, and it's oriented in the manner in which it's supposed to be installed in the JK, up on the windshield frame above the rear view mirror. Now, I'm putting mine at the base of the console, and if I hadn't mentioned before, it's kind of at this angle, and it's, you know, not too visible. It would work, but setting it like that works a lot better. So now that I have all my wiring done in the engine bay and ran into the cab, I'm gonna work on flipping this voltmeter 180 degrees so that it will read right side up when I install the switch panel upside down. Using a flathead screwdriver, pull the plug from the back of the voltmeter, and at least on this unit, a 6mm socket to get the nuts off of the posts. Go birds. Everything's loosened, and that took a little force, but this just slides out like so. There we go. So I'll spin this around so that plug is on the base, same side as the 3M tape, and that'll be facing it in the direction that I need it to be. I marked the holes. I traced out the head of the screw that I'm going to use to attach this. So most of the screw is going to be going through the plastic part of the dash. Now it fits pretty snug, just located. So these screws are really just keeping it from sliding front to back or left to right, as it seats pretty well between the console, center console, and the bottom of the dash. So just used a color pencil that grabbed out of the kitchen drawer here and traced off the head of the screw so that it clears these side pieces, and then just used a hammer and nail set to give it a little bit of a divot for that drill bit to sit in. All right, that's where the switch is going to live. I've used a tape measure to center it on the bottom of this console, just roughly approximating the edge of the switch to this seam right here. It slides back and forth real easy, so I'm just going to use a marker to mark the holes so that I can pull the switch out of the way and at least get the screw started in place so I have something to line up with. So when the screw bites, it starts to pull the dash away. There's a hard piece of steel back there that I'm not going to screw through. I may do that at a later time, but until I see what's behind it and pull the center console off, I'm just going to stick with this. So to stop the screw from going in all the way, I'm just using a stainless steel nut and lock washer. Final product. Looks pretty good. Could pull in a little closer there, and I'll adjust that, but I'm going to call it done for now. Let's start it up. There we go. Voltmeter's reading in the right direction. This is wired to the halos. That turns them on and off. Now I got 5 more switches to have some fun with. There's a lot out there for other Jeeps other than TJ's, and sometimes you just gotta make do with what you have and do some modifications, and I think this comes out pretty good. I actually like it in this location better than overhead in the factory install on a JK. So looking forward to have some fun with this, and good luck on your project.